Hello, Aaron. Namaste.
Hello, namaste, Brother Shankara.
Good to see your name on the screen.
This is a bit unusual. I think Saturday classes are usually have a lot of people.
Well, we'll see what happens. There's Brahmadas. Hello, Brahmadas. Namaste.
I always enjoy studying Swami Prabhavananda, so I'm looking forward to today's class.
Good. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere, and especially to those who are on the screen just now. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May you have peace of mind. So, we are studying Swami Prabhavananda's talk on bhakti, on the path of devotion. And I've gone back a few lines. Love is the easiest of disciplines. It waits for no logic. It is natural. We need no demonstrations, no proof. Reasoning is limiting something by our own minds. We throw a net and catch something, and then say that we have demonstrated it. But never, never can we catch God in a net. Maharaj once told me, our love is so deep that we do not know. Our love is so deep that we do not let you know that we love you. This is God's love. As you practice disciplines, you begin to feel that love and to realize how this breeze of grace is blowing all the time toward you. As you approach nearer, you begin to feel an overwhelming love of God. I'm going to read that again. As you practice disciplines, you begin to feel that love and to realize how this breeze of grace is blowing all the time toward you. As you approach nearer, You begin to feel an overwhelming love of God, and your head and your heart goes out. That is ecstasy. You become intoxicated. Now, is this true? Does this really happen? Yes. Yes, it really happens. It starts off as a feeling of warmth in the heart, at the heart area. It becomes bliss. What is bliss? Bliss is the natural condition of our being. We are naturally Satchidananda. So behind the distractions, behind all the limitations, is bliss. When we begin to practice spiritual disciplines and the limitations become less, bliss naturally emerges. As we progress, we sense, oh, this bliss is another translation of bliss in Satchidananda is love. This is the love of the divine that I'm feeling. And then as you continue to practice, at some point, you will have this feeling of being what the Swami calls overwhelmed. Your mind is simply, so to speak, pushed to the periphery, pushed to the side by this strong feeling. It goes beyond bliss now, beyond what we think of as ordinary bliss. And you go into a kind of samadhi, or what the Swami calls ecstasy. You become intoxicated. It does happen. As Al-Halaj, a Sufi saint, said, I am the truth. I am he whom I love, and he whom I love is I. Now, just to give another perspective on this, this is the same refrain talked about by Meister Eckhart, a Christian Catholic saint. And he talked about the love, but he also said, the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. So this love becomes all-encompassing, omnipresent. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. As Al-Halaj, a Sufi saint, said, I am the truth. I am he whom I love, and he whom I love is I. And Muhammad said, verily, I, even I, am God, and there is none else. He didn't mean just the personality Muhammad. He meant each of us. Dionysius, a Christian mystic, said, it is the nature of love to change a man into that which he loves. Dionysius said, it is the nature of love to change a man into that which he loves. I mean, we have these even kind of peculiar little demonstrations of this. People say, oh, people tend to look like the dogs that they love. The dog and the person are said to look alike. This is just a funny little peculiar demonstration of this fact. Perhaps you have noticed that if there is real love between a husband and wife, he takes on some of her characteristics and she takes on some of his. In just the same way, if you love God, you imbibe his nature. Now note the verb, imbibe. Christ said, "He who drinks from my mouth shall not taste death." And he said, "I will become you. I am the vine, ye are the branches." In the same way, if you love God, you imbibe his nature. You drink down his nature. As you read in the Bible, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and everything else shall be added unto you. When you have realized that, you see the same God everywhere. These are actual experiences in life. When you have realized, when seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you. When you have realized that, you see the same God everywhere. These are actual experiences in life, not confined to books or talk, but experience. However, do not talk of your experiences to others. Spiritual experiences must be guarded. Now, that's an important point. And to expand on it a little bit, we've all, or most of us, I'm sure, have heard the expression, "Don't cast pearls before swine." This is not to say that people outside of our spiritual community are swine, but you don't speak of your spiritual experiences to them because they have no way to understand them. And what you see reflected in their eyes may, and in what they say, may detract from your spiritual experience. But it isn't that you can't speak of your spiritual experiences to others within our little community. You have to be careful and thoughtful, and certainly not boastful. But the Swami was careful to point this out to people within the spiritual community there. You will have spiritual experiences, and they should be guarded. Shankara emphasized the path of knowledge and said that love is a means to attain knowledge. So he came at it from that direction. Shankara emphasized the path of knowledge and said that love is a means to attain knowledge. Ramanuja, on the other hand, pointed out that the path of love is the highest and knowledge is the means. As Swami Prabhavananda said, don't think too much about this. It's a distinction without a difference. The goal remains the same. So whatever appeals to you, the path of knowledge, the path of love. But when Shankara means love as a means, he only refers to the preparatory disciplines of love. And when Ramanuja says knowledge is a means, he means intellectual knowledge. We find in the life of Ramakrishna that he made no distinction whatsoever. He gave equal importance to all paths. I'm going to repeat that. So Shankara said, love is a means, and Ramanuja said, knowledge is a means, and they both meant the lower forms of love and knowledge. We find in the life of Ramakrishna that he made no distinction whatsoever. He gave equal importance to all paths. And in the Bhagavad Gita, we find great emphasis on all paths. In fact, both Sri Ramakrishna and the Gita emphasize that we must follow all four yogas simultaneously. All four yogas. We're studying right now bhakti, the path of devotion, the path of love. The other three are karma yoga, the path of action, raja yoga, the path of contemplation, concentration, and meditation, and jnana yoga, the path of wisdom or higher knowledge. So, and this is what Swami Vivekananda, of course, brought to us. There will be one of these four paths that is your predominant, because it fits best with your personality and the way of life that you've already established. But you take from all of them. In fact, both Sri Ramakrishna and the Gita emphasize that we must follow all four yogas simultaneously. Now, there are different forms of love that we find expressed in human life. But whatever form love takes, its intrinsic nature is divine because God is love. Let that sink in. Whatever form love takes, its intrinsic nature, that it may be modified by our misunderstandings and our ignorance, but the basic thrust, the basic quality of love that is upwelling is the same. Its intrinsic nature is the same. It's divine because God is love. It's just that we do not know it. And so we never find fulfillment. In this connection, I'll tell you a story. Mirabai was a great saint and devotee of Sri Krishna. And that it qualifies as one of the understatements of the century, that she was a devotee of Sri Krishna. She had given herself over, every molecule of her being, to Sri Krishna. At that time, there was a disciple of the great teacher, Sri Chaitanya, living in Vrindavan. Mirabai went there to visit this great soul, but was told that he did not meet women. Mirabai answered, I didn't know there was any man other than Sri Krishna in this city of Vrindavan. Immediately the saint ran toward her and bowed down. There are many versions of this story. You've heard it, the one told before of Mirabai coming to a temple. And the temple attendant, the gatekeeper, said women are not allowed in the temple. And so she said, well, may I speak to the head priest? And the head priest came out and she said to him, are not all souls female before God? the story goes, he took her by the hand and led her into the temple. So this is another version of that same story. Mirabai went to visit a great saint in Vrindavan, but was told that he did not meet women. Mirabai answered, I didn't know there was any man other than Sri Krishna in this city of Vrindavan. Immediately the saint ran toward her and bowed down. The import of this story for us is that there is only one divine presence. Only one divine presence. Everything is an aspect of that divine presence. We can direct our love toward God only if we have the desire for God. I'll tell you another story. There was a young prince known as Dhruva. The king threw him and his mother out without any means of support. So there was a young prince named Dhruva. The king, he was a son of this king. He was a prince. The king threw him and his mother out without any means of support. Dhruva, still a little boy, asked his mother, I understand that you are the queen and I am a prince. How can I gain back my kingdom? How can I gain back the love of my father? The mother said, well, my child, there is no other way but to seek that from God. But it is so difficult to devote oneself to God. You have to go away to a deep forest and live alone and pray. Without letting his mother know, the little boy ran away into the deep forest and began to pray earnestly. Note how the little boy took literally what his mother said and went and did it. I'm in class. I can't talk just now, Carolina. Without letting his mother know, the little boy ran away into the deep forest and began to pray earnestly. Narada, who is said to be the eternal teacher, appeared before him and said, I have felt your heart's cry for God. He initiated Dhruva and asked him to practice disciplines by which he had the vision of God. God said, now the kingdom is waiting for you. The king is coming to welcome you and your mother. Dhruva said, no, I don't want the kingdom. I want only you. You see, once he had found that sweetness in the presence of God, a kingdom meant nothing. But God said, no, you prayed for it. You have to get it. So is there a message in that for us about being careful what we pray for? Don't you know from your own life how many times you have prayed for something and then after you got it, you didn't want it anymore? Ain't it the truth? Once my master said to me, worldly people talk about the joy of life, but what do they know about how to enjoy the life? Once my master said to me, worldly people talk about the joy of life, but what do they know about how to enjoy life? The joy of life is only to be found in the love of God. So that's the end of that talk on the path of devotion. It ends with the story of Dhruva, or these stories of Mirabai and Dhruva, so on. The next, we'll take this up after our discussion. The next talk is on the path of knowledge. Are there any comments or questions about what we heard over the last, I think, 3 or 4 weeks about the path of devotion, the path of love? Any comments or questions? Anything you'd like to contribute to our studying this together?
When Swami Prabhavananda talks about his master, that was one of his guru was one of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna, was it not?
Not just one of the disciples, the first monastic disciple, the ever free soul, as Sri Ramakrishna called him, Swami Brahmananda, Rakal.
Right, that's what I thought, Brahmananda.
Yeah, and so he was known as the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. Sri Ramakrishna saw him in a vision before he came and recognized him as he was coming in the boat to the Dakshineshwar Ghat landing place, and of course went into ecstasy when he saw him. Yes, Swami Prabhavananda wrote a book about Rakal, Swami Brahmananda. The title of the book is The Eternal Companion. And the significance of that title is that this being that appeared as Rakal Brahmananda, otherwise known as Raja or Maharaj, comes with every incarnation of God in some form or another. He was Krishna's brother Balaram, so on. So yes, Swami Brahmananda was very special to Sri Ramakrishna. There's lots of discussion of Rakal in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Thank you, Brahmadas. Yes, that's right. Anything else? Anything else from anyone about the path of love that we've been reading about and discussing?
Brother, it's Peter Cower.
Yes, Peter. So good to hear from you.
Thank you. Belated Happy New Year.
Belated Happy New Year to you as well.
To everyone else. I'm struck by the last story that you discussed about, and I've noticed in that I think it's that I've read that there are different types of devotees, in the sense that, and I've noticed that in myself, that at first, much of my devotion was for material well-being. So I'm struck by the prince who goes and wants, and in one case, the return of his kingdom and the love of his father, different orders, but nonetheless, and then is overtaken with a pure devotion, I guess.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful, everything you read today was wonderful, very moving.
Thank you. I remember these are the Swami's words. these are the Swami. This is like sitting by Swami's knee. It's interesting about Dhruva, he did have to go and become the king. He did become the king. And our beloved brother Dhruva, who now is suffering from Parkinson's disease, so he's no longer able to be with us as much as he was.
Yes.
But he was named Dhruva by his guru, Swami Bashananda, the Chicago Swami. because he too, his story was he was a novice with the Swami in Ganges, Michigan. Then he went to India, and that was his going to the forest, so to speak, to attain full devotion. But afterwards, he had to return to the world and become a teacher of Sanskrit and many other things. And so and what he said was, well, he developed the aspiration to become an American rishi. And I think that he is well along on that path. Now he's, of course, faced with the challenge of dealing with his inner reactions to having Parkinson's disease, which is a great challenge. Thank you, Peter, and I find it very moving too. These talks of Swami Prabhavananda are such a joy to study.
Truly.
Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, Brother Shankara?
Yes, Swayam, yes.
I'm not sure if my question is particularly relevant to the path of devotion, but what are the similarities and differences, if there are any, between saints and avatars and a realized devotee?
Okay. An avatar is a direct expression of the divine presence taking human form in order to lift humanity up. If you want to understand more about the details, read Swami Vivekananda's Christ the Messenger. He very clearly expresses what it is that Krishna means when he says, whenever virtue declines and vice prevails, I shall make myself a body and come among you to restore righteousness. This is an avatar. It is the divine being, Ishwar. Ishwar is genderless. It is the presence of the divine in manifestation. Then they'll come as Ishwara, the male aspect, and Ishwari, the female aspect. Rama and Sita, Krishna and Radha, and for that matter, Rukmini, who was another of Krishna's queens, but she also was a form of the Divine Mother. Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Sarada Devi. Now, saints. Saints are those people who, through having been chosen by the divine, ye have not chosen me, I have chosen you, as Christ said. They ascend to the point in spiritual life to where they become one with the divine presence. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me, said Meister Eckhart. A knower of Brahman becomes Brahman, says the Upanishad. So these people start out as a human being and then are transformed by the divine presence itself into an expression of that. And these are the 12 people. There are many more, of course, but the 12 people that you find in love poems from God all are an expression of that level of sainthood. A devotee, yourself, myself, we will, through our spiritual efforts, again, having been chosen, this is part of tomorrow morning's talk, having been chosen by the divine, we attain liberation by their grace. Now, we may also, by their grace, return with them in a later incarnation. Sri Ramakrishna said he'll be back in 2086. That's what he said, 200 years after his death in 1886. And he said he would bring with him his band of minstrels. Now, when he was speaking to M. Mahendranath Gupta, the man who was responsible for taking Thakur's words and turning them into the Katamrita, or the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna said of him, in a vision, I saw you in Chaitanya's party. In other words, those people who were in the inner circle of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's manifestation. And he said of two of his disciples, Ramakrishnananda and Saradananda, Sri Ramakrishna said that they had been disciples of Christ. So but the distinction between who you are as a human being and your sense of yourself as the divine being disappears for all three of those classifications. You no longer think of yourself as this action experience suit and its personality and so on. You see that is just a vehicle, a garment, as Sri Krishna puts it, for your participation in Mother's play.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Ooh, that was a very good question. And it pertains to all of us. Anybody else have anything?
Brother Shankara,
Yes, Haima.
I heard when I was growing up, my mother used to say, Dhruva became a star in the sky, pole star. Do you know anything that you could give us some knowledge?
I think that's part of the Puranas, dear. You know, I really don't know the Puranas all that well.
Yeah.
There are so many myths and so many stories. If that's in the Puranas,
Yes.
you know, there's bound to be some seed of truth in it. But Swami Vivekananda said, be careful about these old books because they're a mixture. He took this from Sri Ramakrishna. They're a mixture of sugar and sand. There is some superstition in them. And so they're not all necessarily literally true.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Yes, Brother Shankara.
Yes.
I just had a sort of I guess a comment, or just that kind of a personal experience as someone who's just been very focused on knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and that's that. There's this. I feel like there's a danger when uh, when when you haven't practiced any sort of devotional work or practiced love, that your life isn't organized in a way that can sort of accommodate it. And so what can happen is, if you come to a realization about something like let's say the divine nature of all sentient beings, and you that realization then forces you to, it doesn't allow you to have enemies, and
It doesn't allow you to have, I missed the word.
enemies.
Oh, enemies. Yes, right.
And so there's this risk that, because your entire structure of your life, your entire everything from your political views, everything, every all of these motivating forces that kind of keep you going, everything is threatened. And so there's this risk that you'll sort of suppress the knowledge, and you'll turn away from it. If the realization wasn't strong enough to be unshakable, then it can cause like a sort of a regression, and then create a new sort of barrier to overcome.
Yes, all of that's true. Everything that you said. And I implore you to read the last 2 chapters of the Vivekachudamani. If you've read them before, read them again. About just exactly the kinds of things that you're talking about. How the path of knowledge, all of the paths, particularly when one comes close to the culmination of the path. It's not called Mahamaya for nothing. There are great temptations and distractions that arise at the end, toward the end of each of the paths, as you're reaching the end of the path. So yes, all of that you said is very much potentially there. How to overcome it and how to see it from the path of knowledge, from the jnana perspective, from the jnani's perspective. Sri Krishna, Adi Shankaracharya so clearly spells out in the last 2 chapters of the Vivekachudamani. He also talks about it in his commentary on the Gita, Shankara does. But before you read Shankara's commentary on the Gita, I suggest you read the first 6 chapters of the Gita, and then read them again, and then read them again, so that you have gotten really deeply familiar from your own understanding, from your own way of being, what it is that Krishna means. Then you'll much better be able to understand Adi Shankaracharya's commentary on the Gita. Until you have your own grasp of it. In other words, how do I actually think, act, speak out what Krishna is saying in the first? It's not possible for you to really grasp and be inflected by Adi Shankaracharya's commentary. Does all that make sense?
Yes.
Good, and I'm glad you brought that up, because you're very, very right. Each of the paths in the path of knowledge, you've accurately described some of the possibilities. In the path of devotion, as Swami Vivekananda said, so many people turn cheat. Those are his words. Turn cheat. And the way they turn cheat is to sentimentalize, to pretend as if it's a truth for them when they're just pretending it. It's not, and so you get false piety and spiritual pride and all these things that come along with sentimentalism. So the Swami Prabhavananda didn't speak about that in this particular talk. But if you read his book, How to Know God, you find a very, which is his exposition, his bhasha, his translation and commentary of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. If you read How to Know God, he does identify the potential detours, side roads, traps that exist in each of the four paths. So each of them has their own. And as Mark Twain points out, you know, we are so tempted by these side roads. Though the path ahead of us is clean and clear, it'll make a bend and we'll see a side road going off to the side. And we'll say, well, I wonder what's around that corner rather than around this corner. And what happens is we walk into a patch of bullthorns because we're not being careful. And for any of you who've ever walked barefoot into a patch of bullthorns, you'll know exactly what I mean. I have done that. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara,
Mm-hmm.
how do you sort of go more towards yearning and be careful against sentimentalism?
You have hit on the very key for each of the paths. And this is being absolutely honest about who you are in this moment. Sri Ramakrishna says the greatest trap, the greatest mistake is hypocrisy. So what is really true for me? And it is something that is a moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day pursuit. Swami Vivekananda, having come back from the United States in 1900, was once found in the hallway outside of his room, pounding his forehead against the wall. Swami Turiyananda found him in this condition. He had been doing it enough to where his forehead was bleeding. And Turiyananda said, Swamiji, what is the matter? And Vivekananda said, now this was Vivekananda, who had at least twice been in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, was a paragon of knowledge and wisdom. He was pounding his head against the wall and he said, the torment of attachment. The torment of attachment. He had become very attached emotionally, and for that matter, I'm sure it went beyond emotion to the spiritual realm in a way that would not be possible for us to really understand. He had become attached to the Hale family, most especially the two Hale daughters. Now, there was nothing romantic about it. This was not, it's just that he had such aspirations for them. He so wanted them to pursue the path toward liberation. Now, as we'll talk about tomorrow morning, we don't choose that moment. Ye have not chosen me. I have chosen you, Christ said. But he wanted that, particularly for those two daughters. And both of them had taken a more worldly turn. And Mrs. Hale, who Swamiji referred to as Mother Church. She's the one who rescued him when he was sitting on the curb, as it happened outside her home, when he lost all his papers and his money and so on, and on his way to the Parliament of World Religions. She's the one who rescued him. And he loved her dearly. But she too had not assimilated what he wanted her to assimilate. So Swami Vivekananda was pounding his head against the wall until it was bleeding because of the torment of attachment. He was perfectly sincere with himself about the truth of who he was, even though it wasn't the Vivekananda that we want to think about. Now, there's a coda to this little story. Some days later, Turiyananda went to wake, as he had been requested to do. He went to wake Swami Vivekananda from a nap. And instead of Swami Vivekananda's body on the bed, there were 12 foot tall, a little bit like that tall. There were 12 Shiva Nataraj dancing in a circle. 12 Shiva Nataraj, not Swami's body on the bed. Of course, Turiyananda withdrew and then came back a little bit later, and there was Swamiji's body on the bed, and he woke him from his nap. So one of the things that we have to be very aware of, Swayam, so that we are not hypocritical, is that we are capable of being both things at once. A very sincere devotee and someone who is still has attachment and aversion and so on. So the tendency to perfectionism is what leads us to sentimentality. I have to be perfect, therefore I'll pretend I'm perfect. Oh no. In this way, according to Swami Prabhavananda, in extreme cases, in that direction lies suicide. because people can't stand the truth about themselves. And anyway, you'll have to read it. But those passages are in that book, How to Know God by Swami Prabhavananda. Not the business about Turiyananda and Swamiji. That comes from someplace else. But thanks for asking that question. That is, we have to be willing. We have to be willing if we're going to make progress. We don't have to do anything, but if we're going to make progress, we have to be honest with ourselves about who we are.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Did that fully answer the question?
Yes, Brother Shankara, it did. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear. Jenny.
Yes. Could you say more about the drive to perfectionism and spiritual? It seems like there needs to be a drive towards spiritual attainment, but kind of like parsing that from a drive for perfection.
One, the drive for perfection is a creature of the mind. The drive for spiritual attainment is an aspect of the heart. When we have to understand, we don't have to, but it's best if we understand that the mind is an exitless maze. There's no way out of the mind. It will ultimately become purified, and in doing so, in a sense, dissolves. And so it is no longer an exitless maze. But until that time, the mind is an exitless maze, and it will continue to come up with all kinds of reasons why it should be in control. And this drive for perfection, which is inherently absurd if we think about it, if we reason about it, even with our mind that wants to be in control, if we reason about it, we'll see that it is inherently absurd. So it is the yearning of the heart that powers our spiritual efforts. Our mind can be in aid of that, but must never be in control of it, thinking, no, I must be mistakeless. I must be errorless. I have to be perfect. Comical on the face of it. We're not going to. So we have to accept our mistakes, be self-loving and self-forgiving, which comes from the heart, and not let the left mind take control. So the drive for spiritual attainment is a yearning of the heart toward freedom and happiness, true freedom, true happiness. The inventions of the left mind tend to be, if they're not in aid of what is being done through the yearnings of the heart, they tend to be detours. Is that clear?
It's a great answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a great question. We start with that. Anything else from anyone? This is so productive. I'm sure that this is answering questions, not just for the person who asks them, but for others. That's what Sangha is. That's why we say we study the art of spirituality together.
I found it interesting that Dhruva's mother instructs him, it is so difficult to devote oneself to God. You have to go away to a deep forest and live alone and pray. And this COVID has kind of forced many of us, to live alone and pray. So as terrible as it is, some good has come of it spiritually.
Much good has come of it in odd ways. That's one. Well said, Brahmadas. Well said. But, at this tag end of the Kali Yuga, as Sri Ramakrishna tells us about it, he says, you don't have to do that. It's easier than it was for Dhruva. We don't have to go away to the forest. But as you said, this enforced isolation because of the virus, it's been a blessing, but it's also been very difficult.
Oh, no, I'm not saying it's been easy. I'm just saying, like, some of us would not normally choose to live alone, and now we had no choice, and some
Right.
good has come of it spiritually.
Yeah, and you have you found a wonderful friend in your cat Shiva, and those pictures that you sent of Shiva and his friend, perhaps his sister, were very charming.
Indeed.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
as a follow-up, I think, not to like sound, like patting the back or something, but I think your statement that you have not chosen me, I have chosen you, that seems to be relevant, because even with this COVID, there are people who are choosing, to download series after series on Netflix or political stuff or whatever. Not everybody is turning to spending time in spiritual pursuit.
Well, no, of course not.
Yes, I agree. Some people are not, how can I say it? They're squandering this great opportunity and getting into drugs and alcohol and violence. And and it's just, yeah.
We have to be careful of judgment of others. In that way lies spiritual pride. The way they're living their life, if we're to believe what the Gita says, the Upanishads say, and what Sri Ramakrishna underlines again and again, God alone is the doer. However it seems to us, and we need to be honest about how it seems to us, as you are, Brahmadas, and I so admire that. But as was brought up earlier in a very insightful comment, from a perspective of attainment, spiritual attainment, one can have no enemies. One can have no judgments of others. And it makes life very challenging indeed. Because the left mind, oh man, does it want to head off in that direction just pell-mell. I'm right, they're wrong. I'm doing good, they're squandering. Whatever it is. And it is hard. I mean, this is not said theoretically. These last few days after the 6th of January have been very difficult.
Because of the incidents on the Capitol? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, because of attachments to certain ways of being and thinking.
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, we tend to judge those people, and
Yeah.
I had the same.
So, the reason this story of Swamiji and Swami Turiyananda came to mind was I took refuge there, because of what was going on in this mind. Attachment and aversion they're there. And this is why I recommend reading those last 2 chapters of the Vivekachudamani by Adi Shankaracharya, because he points out that as long as you're embodied, it's going to happen. No matter how, until you have completely annihilated the mind. Or as he puts it much more poetically, my mind, Adi Shankaracharya speaking, my mind fell like a hailstone into the ocean of consciousness and therein dissolved. And you've heard it remarked how pregnant the metaphor of hailstone is, because a hailstone is not a solid lump. It's layer after layer after layer after layer around a seed at the very core of the hailstone, a seed of mote of dust or something. So when Adi Shankaracharya said, my mind fell like a hailstone into the ocean of consciousness and therein dissolved, he didn't mean all at once. Layer by layer by layer.
So, Brother Shankara.
Yes, dear.
The other thing is, your story about Swami Vivekananda banging his head and saying, this is the agony of attachment. I think that
torment.
Whatever, torment. We often are like, okay, just don't be attached, and you're like, okay, I won't be attached, or you have to annihilate the self. Okay, I'll do that. You don't do any of it, right? It's God that does that.
Exactly. But it becomes very hard to parse it apart after a time. Who's doing what? The left mind wants to insist over and over in so many subtle ways that it's in control. That it's the one who's doing this. And so, yes, we have these, as you very nicely acted out in the way you presented that. We have these little playlets that we do for ourselves about, oh, I won't be attached. I'm not attached. I'm annihilating the mind and so on. Right.
I think that's how we can get discouraged, though, because it almost seems like it's like, okay, just stop doing that. And you're like, okay, but then I realize I can't.
Well, this is where the discouragement is out of pride. And this is where we have to develop this capacity for self-love and self-forgiveness, which is rooted in the heart. Right. The heart is continuous. The heart is a reflection of the presence. The mind, however, is something altogether different. And so we must learn from our heart to forgive our mind. Not to condone it. It's not a question of condoning. As Swami Swahananda would say, we'd lament about something like this, something, some difficulty having to do with the left mind and trying to hold 2 thoughts at one time and blah, 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 whatever it was. He would say, what's done is done. Go forward. So if we just take that attitude toward our mind and the fruits of our actions. What's done is done. There's a subtext, offer that to the divine, which is what Sri Krishna spells out in some detail in chapter 4. Offer that to the divine and then go forward. What does it mean to go forward? Go forward means to insist on the truth as you understand it at that time, and at the same time completely acknowledging any doubts or fears that you have. It's not called, as I said, it's not called Mahamaya for nothing, and the path is not called the razor's edge for nothing. But what we need to understand about the razor's edge is it's not an abyss below us on the razor's edge. It's only like 6 inches to the ground, so to speak. We step off, oh, all right, I stepped off. As soon as I can, I step back on. And placing one foot very carefully, one in front of the other, as we see these acrobats do on the balance beam. Carefully, carefully, one foot in front of the other on the razor's edge. As has been said, and I know you've celebrated hearing this from time to time, Janaki, it's simple, but it's not easy.
The other thing is that, and I always lose sight of this constantly, is that it's slowly and slowly, to use your words.
Yes, well, not my words.
Okay,
I'm just quoting Swami Sridharananda, and it's very potent when you hear him say it, actually.
Well, changes are happening within you that you're not really aware of.
Exactly.
And then at some point, suddenly the gift is going to, and the gifts can be small gifts, it doesn't have to be the big one at first.
No.
Just little gifts along the way happen. And they're happening all along. You just can't see them. That's what I'm thinking.
They are happening, and then they do come to fruition as some sort of experience, some sort of change in behavior. As Swami Swahananda said, the only true measure of spiritual progress is change in behavior.
But over a while.
Yes. Yeah. Impatience is just another distraction. Impatience with ourselves or with the world or with another person is just another vritti, another whirlpool. What does a whirlpool do? Pulls you down. So impatience is just another form of distraction. And it is part of that left mind's insistence that I'm in control here and things aren't right.
Brother Shankar, I was thinking
first?
one way to, I don't know who's trying.
Go ahead.
I was thinking one way to, when we start feeling judgmental towards others or ourselves, is to redirect it towards more of a gratefulness and prayerful. So whenever I am able to spend time towards spirituality, to express gratitude and pray for more, rather than spend time in judging.
Well, that is a very optimal way to deal with it. Another way to deal with it is to simply offer what you've done to the divine presence, as Krishna says in chapter 4. Offer it all to me, everything, the negative as well as the positive. Offer it all to me. And then it immediately is off your shoulders. And then you can take refuge in this other kind of thinking, other way of being. But one way to get it off your shoulders is to forgive yourself for having done what is not the most auspicious thing, and then to offer it to Krishna or to the Lord in whatever form appeals to your heart, your chosen ideal, your Ishtadeva. Now there was someone else who started talking at the same time as Swayam. Who was that?
Yes, Brother Shankara.
Yes, Vijay.
Namaste. You said something very meaningful for me, that we don't have to condone the mind, we have to forgive the mind. That kind of comes into picture for me very often, and I have to use it. Second, general comment that there is a place for heart and there is a place for the mind. The more important thing is for us to know how much of the mind, how much place are we giving to the mind. Mind has to have its place for me to be safe. For example, after the events of just a few days ago, January the 6th, I have to be more vigilant as to what's happening around. I have to give some place to the mind as to what are my own values, where do I stand in relation to what's happening, but not to be carried away with it.
Mhm. Well, as Albert Einstein said, the left mind is the servant. The right mind, or the heart, is the genius. We have made a god of the servant and ignored the genius. We have created a society in which we worship the servant and ignore the genius. And when we put the cart before the horse like this, it's very hard to make steady, orderly forward progress, because the left mind is so unruly and made of so many layers, as Adi Shankaracharya pointed out.
Brother Shankara,
Yes,
there
dear.
was a beautiful statement that you quoted to me and Neera a couple of times from Swami Siddharananda ji. My life is a continuous. Could you say that statement again? My life is a continuous something.
Oh my goodness. Who? What Swami?
Swami Siddharananda ji from Australia.
Sridharananda. Oh, it's not coming back right now.
It was something about his reveling in the presence of God.
Yes, I know what you're talking about, but I don't want to paraphrase it. I want to get it right, and it's not coming. So,
And on a side note, since you were in California for so long, in Trabuco, that beautiful painting of all the direct disciples, who made that one? Do you know?
Swami Tadatmananda, and that is a construction, by the way. They were never all together in that configuration. He constructed that. He sketched it out and put them all in what he regarded as their appropriate place. Yes, Swami Tadatmananda. You can get copies of that from
Hollywood?
Just Google Tadatmananda.
Okay.
There's a special website where you can order his paintings, giclée copies of his paintings, framed or unframed, as you please.
Thank you. It's a beautiful painting, amazing.
Oh, yes, it's stunning.
Brother Shankara,
Yes.
I wanted to share something that a German philosopher pointed out to me. I thought was really interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of related to that differentiation between sentimentality and I guess emotion or devotion and sentimentality, and it's kind of the jhana equivalent, I guess, would be um, uh, sort of the pursuit of knowledge versus mere curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said, and he said that in so in that particular tradition, in his tradition, there was this idea of what is thought, what is considered thinking, as in true thinking. He said the way that you can tell whether you're engaging in real and true thinking or not is whether or not you're bringing your being to bear. Meaning, when if you're truly thinking, then you're holding your very being, and so that in that way, the um, thoughts are not some external thing, but rather something that flows out of you in a very similar way to any other sort of expression, like a
This,
singing or a dancing.
boy, howdy, did you hit the right metaphors, singing or dancing. And it is the purified mind. As Sri Ramakrishna says, when you attain that state, your mind becomes, and he used those two metaphors, the ones that you just chose. He said, you become like an expert dancer. You cannot put a foot wrong. But it's only the pure being or the pure mind that can do that. And that's a long road of winding to get to the pure mind. But that German philosopher was dead on. Well said. And Sri Ramakrishna also said, that he used the metaphor of the singer, that the expert singer cannot hit a false note and is always in rhythm. So very well said. Thank you. Yes, the pure mind is capable of doing just as you said. And then it will be interrupted by impurity. Mm-hmm. This is why I said to anyone who cares to read the last two chapters of the Vivekachudamani, the crest jewel of discrimination, because Shankaracharya points out, even the illumined will be interrupted by impurity.
It can't be a coincidence that so many people across so many cultures identify this this pure functioning of the mind.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right, Alex. You're absolutely right.
Yes, Brother Shankar, and this impurity that you speak of, could that be like identified as the gunas?
Well, yes, of course, the gunas are the concealing power of tamas and the projecting power of rajas. But then, at a certain level, sattva also becomes a liability because it makes you too comfortable. So yes, the gunas are the expression of Mahamaya. The gunas are just the tools by which Mahamaya manufactures what we experience. And that's why, You know, the scriptures tell us God alone is the doer. We are the observer. We are the witness. That's the truth of our being. But we get all confused thinking I'm busy doing, and so we get all tangled up in the karma of that. Very good observation, Aaron. Thank you. It is the gunas. So we say, oh my gunas, completely forgetting they're not your gunas at all. Anything else from anyone? All right. Well, this is very sweet. Next week, we'll take up the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga or Advaita Vedanta. And the very first word in that talk is the name Shankara. Shankara, the great seer philosopher of India. So we'll take that up next week. And as I've said about being with these talks, it is like sitting at the Swami's knee. He speaks so straightforwardly in sentences we can understand and assimilate. So we'll end with this. A flower at your feet, beloved, for each one who comes to your open door. A flower at your feet, beloved, for each one who stands by your open door and says, come to me, offering to break this world's chain that binds us down to ignorance, suffering, and death. A flower at your feet, beloved, for each one who takes the path that you have struck through this your jungle world. Om Amen. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May you go forward in Mother's loving and protective embrace. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. So until those of you who wish to join us tomorrow morning is the next opportunity for us to gather at 11 o'clock. And the topic is itty bitty austerities. As in contrast to last week's talk on great inconceivable penances. I mean, addressing your earlier question, Swayam, the avatars are, and some of the saints are capable of the great inconceivable penances. All of us who are chosen, ye have not chosen me, I have chosen you. All of us who are chosen are capable of the itty-bitty austerities.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
So until tomorrow morning, Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Any final thoughts from anyone? All right. Until then.
Thanks, Brother Shankara. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.